and welcome to another episode of Black in the Maritimes. I'm Fidel.
I'm Hillary.
I'm Clinton.
And before we welcome our guest, I'm back in Canada. Wow.
Welcome back.
I don't know if I'm happy. Well, yes, I'm happy to be back. I'm happy to be back. I spent a long time with my family. I had friends. It was great. But this is my home and this is my life. But the weather, it is what it is. Uh, Having that said, we have our guest today. We have Savannah Thomas. She lives in Fredericton and she's currently a UNB student. I think you're one of our younger guests. Hillary was one of our younger guests, but I think you're probably the youngest guest that we had. How you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. So, Savannah, tell us a bit about yourself. I'm gonna break it down before you tell. We're basically gonna talk about like school experiences and racism in schools, and which better for people like Hillary and you as well that grew up in this town to talk about it. So, we're doing well, thank you. So, tell us a little bit about you.
So I'm currently in school, as you guys all know, but I also do a lot of writing on the side. I'm part of the New Brunswick Black Artists Alliance. So we're doing a lot of work to get unknown or lesser known Black artists a platform to showcase their work. And yeah.
Shout out to Chandui. He was the guest in this podcast. So yeah, we definitely follow his work and what you guys do. So you grew up here in New Brunswick, born and raised.
Yes.
So tell us about like you are you like your parents are from here? How did it all come together?
So my mom is from here and she is white. My dad is also from here and he's Black, but he grew up in a small community called Elm Hill. And that's pretty close to Gagetown. I'm not sure if you guys know of that or not, but yeah.
Okay, so yeah, so basically your dad is from that descendant of like Tandawee was I guess Mary Louise McCarthy, which was his mother. So he kind of goes from that this same area, which we
Mhm.
know. So we know what that same area. So did your dad ever tell you about growing up as a Black kid in New Brunswick?
Not really. So my parents are actually divorced. So I grew up with my mom and like her side of the family. So I learned a lot about my Black history and Elm Hill and all of that just through educating myself and reading books and doing things like that.
Okay, so do you actually still have a relationship with your dad, or is that like not something that you guys get
We
along?
have a relationship. It's pretty good. We talk every day through email and stuff like that. And he's actually taught me a lot. We rekindled our relationship a couple summers ago, and it's going pretty well.
Oh wow, that's great. That's good to have. Well, it's kind of similar to what Hillary. She kind of rekindled her relationship with her dad
Not
over
even
there.
kinda. We super rekindled. He emails me TikToks every night because that's what a 52-year-old man should be doing with his time.
Hey, whatever makes the old man happy. That's
Hmm.
that's that's what's up. So growing up in Fredericton, Fredericton is the capital of New Brunswick. It's basically a government town. A lot of people work in the government, and a lot of people. It's being patronized for like a bougie place because that's how people think it is because of the capital. Is it that, or is it just like a hick town like everywhere else in New Brunswick?
Personally, I find it to be a very upper class and privileged city. It's very white. We do have like a broad cultural community, but it's not as big as the white population, I guess.
Yeah, I mean that's the Maritimes, I guess. That's Atlantic Canada. If even you go to a place like Nova Scotia, which has like a rich Black culture, there are not that many. There's more white people again. So tell us about your growing up. So you grew up in with your mom's side of the family, which is white. So pretty much, you got raised up in some people would be like the New Brunswick way, which is the English side. If people don't know, and if you hear this podcast, you probably know that we're a bilingual province. There's an Acadian culture here as well. But you grew up in an English side, which mostly traditions of a white Caucasian family. So when did you realize that you were a person of color? Like, when did you realize that came to you?
Um, I would probably say that I was in elementary school. Um, Probably in the third or fourth grade. We used to have picnics at the end of like the school year, kind of to celebrate. And I had a classmate, kind of come up and question me about, where my dad is and why he's not here. And, then questions about, well, is your like what color is your dad, and why is your family white, and why do you not look like them, and things like that. And I mean, I was so young, I didn't really understand necessarily like what they were getting at. But of course my family knew what was going on, and then of course we had to have conversations about race and all of those things.
So how was that conversation like for a white parent to tell about their kid that, like, hey, this might happen to you, or people will tell you X or Y?
I mean, I can only imagine how difficult it was, for my family, just because, you never want to have to tell a child that something about them is going to make them stick out or make them different. But, my mom always talked to me about these things in an age appropriate way. And any kind of question that I had, she always answered, and nothing was ever off the table.
Now, that's sort of interesting. Like, it never came in your family, like on your surroundings with the family, but it came at school.
Mhm.
And did you think, maybe when you hang out with your cousins or everybody, you were just part of the family part, or was it? Do you think it was something that it's your family, nobody cares, or is it something that it was say, hey, never talk about this subject?
I don't think, I mean, I think that it was something that was known. But I mean, I'm also the youngest. Well, I'm an only child. I'm also the only grandchild. So, all of my cousins are in their 30s now. So I didn't really have like any type of other children around me to talk about those things with. But I mean, for the older people in my family, it was definitely something that was known, but it was never, a problem or something that we didn't talk about, if that makes sense.
So I'll ask that question to Hillary and Clinton, you as well, as you guys are mixed as well. I know Clinton, you grew up in a big place with Toronto, which I don't think it's so like you probably saw people of color, but that was never talked in your house either, or was it something that, like, I don't know, how was it in Toronto, because it's of the diversity, it probably wasn't like a big subject.
Um, no, in my house, like things like color weren't really talked about too often. My parents really worked hard to try to teach us to not see color, see that it doesn't matter. We're all the same. We're all God's children. So I saw color all around me. I saw culture all around me, to be more specific. And while I always tried not to say color and said I didn't see color, I feel like I always did my whole life. But it's something that I liked and I loved and I appreciated. You guys, you folks hear me talk about it all the time. I always talk about how I grew up in like the most diverse city around every culture and what it was like and what it meant to me and stuff like that. So, especially being interracial and sometimes feeling like, what is your culture, what is your community, you could kind of find solidarity in just kind of being around the whole world, everyone. um, yeah.
What about you, Hillary? Like, was that ever a conversation?
I remember it being conversation in weird ways. So like because my mom had me at 43, it wasn't like there were cousins or siblings or people to point out that I was different, because it was really just me and my mom, and it was really the community that I was in and at school that it became a problem, or that it was brought to my attention. As I've talked about on this podcast several times, my mom made me very aware that at the age of 2, I was called a nigger baby and that people were going to be racist to me, I think because she was very afraid of having to deal with that. And so instead of letting it happened to me when I was at an age that I would understand that I was different. She was ready to tell me upfront, people are going to have this problem with you. They're going to dislike you for this. It has nothing to do with you, your capabilities. You're just beautiful and they're jealous. My mom always tried to force like Black Barbie dolls and baby dolls onto me to make sure that I felt like that there was at least some modicum of representation and inclusivity, but I only ever wanted what all the other kids had. So I had no interest in, as I've said many times, but like I had no interest in my Blackness. And I just remember my mom talking about people who were not related to me, but that we knew, who maybe were using me as their token Black person to prove that their family wasn't racist. And I don't want to say who in my life, but because these people are still in my life, but there are certain people who she felt like, yeah, they flaunt around that they know you so that they can dispel the idea that their family used to be racist. And that was a really weird thing for me to hear at like the age of 10. But yeah, growing up with just me and my mom, it was very like open, honest flow of conversation.
And I you know, I think this in context, and I think this in context myself, because I didn't live through that experience. My experience was totally different because I grew up in another country, where there is some type of racism, but it's kind of not said, or it's a little bit different there. Definitely, but I think I will say to the listeners, if you haven't read George Eliot Clark book, please read it. I think it's a very good book, and he talks about when he discovered the N word as a kid. It's a hilarious It's a hilarious chapter that he starts throwing. They start throwing rocks at him and calling him nigger, and he didn't understand the word, and he started throwing rocks at the other white kids, saying, and he was saying them niggers, and the white kids were like stunned, like, what the fuck is he saying like that for? He didn't understand it, and he didn't understand what the word was, and his dad had to explain them, and he'd explain it with sugar cups. So that's kind of interesting on that subject, of how people realize that they're Black. Like, because I think we always said in this podcast, we don't see ourselves as Blacks. The white man puts us as Black, and then we're like, oh, we're Black, and that's the reason, and that's what the whole. But nobody, I don't think anybody else is saying like, oh, a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old is like, oh, my name is Sean and I'm Black, right? Like, unless they teach him that. But I mean, that's part of the thing. Like, Hillary had a good thing. Like, did you realize? Were you interested, which I don't think most children are, in your Blackness, or was it something that it wasn't to your mind? You were just, like I said, a kid, and kids don't think about that. Savannah?
Oh, sorry. I think, I mean, I had an interest. I always had like the toys that were available. Like I had baby dolls that were Black, and I had, you know, the occasional Barbie doll that was Black. And those things were always available to me if I wanted them. But at the same time, I just grew up around, my white family members, and all my classmates were white. And, I'm just surrounded by so much whiteness that I didn't really know what it meant to be Black, if that makes sense. I still struggle with what it means to be Black. Like, I really don't have an answer. And, I went through phases where I didn't really label myself as anything. And then I was like, no, I'm biracial. And now I'm like, well, no, I'm Black. Like, because at the end of the day, if people look at me, they're going to look at me and say, she's Black, or she's something that's not white. But no one's ever going to look at me and say she's white, if that makes sense.
Or you get the question, where are you from? Oh.
Yeah, I mean, I get that a lot. I used to get that all throughout school, high school especially. And it wasn't just where are you from, it's always what part of Africa are you from. And I always find that to be such an interesting thing, because just because you're Black doesn't mean that you come straight from Africa. And I always found that that was something that people couldn't necessarily comprehend, So
Yeah, that they a lot of people don't. So was there other black kids where you were at school?
so in elementary school, there was only two of us, and our teachers would actually call us by each other's names. And it was sort of, they thought that it was like cute and funny, that they were mixing us up because, you know, we were the only two little black girls. And if you actually look at us side by side, we look nothing alike. And then, you know, once I hit high school, teachers were still calling us by each other's names, and I didn't even have the same teachers as her, and it was just easier to not point out the fact that that's not who I am and to just like let it go. But yeah, I think in my grade 12 like class, we had 550-ish graduates. And I think there was less than 10 of us.
Wow, like that. I think that's kind of lazy work that you like. Oh, you're both black. We confuse you because you're black. Like, go ahead.
The exact same experience. I had the exact same experience. And this other little black girl got lice. And this like teacher went to my mother and told her, which is supposed to be confidential, all about this other kid's lice, until my mom was like, you've got the wrong black kid, in the most aggressive way to make them understand that they had screwed us up. Same exact thing happened to me. We did not look alike. She was darker and had a brother who went to the school as well, whereas I had no siblings. Same thing.
That is insane, though. Like, I mean, that you kids, you know, they have different forms and stuff. Like, you don't confuse the other white kids. Why would you confuse? And again, not to say teachers have a hard time. They have a hard time. I can't stress enough the amount of work that teachers do, but the fact that you should be able to know the kids' names. I mean, I can see that's kind of like in the basic aspect of things, but I mean, that is crazy to me. And again, I'm sorry that girls have to go through that, but that is their reality. So, as a person of color going to school, how would you say that the experience was personally to you?
It was pretty rough. I mean, I would not go back to school if I had the chance. You know, from elementary school, like when I was in kindergarten, you know, I came home crying to my mom asking to take a bath because one of my classmates told me that because my skin was brown, I was dirty and I smelled. And, you know, I was only 5. And that continued on all the way through high school. I don't know if you guys have ever read To Kill a Mockingbird or not, but I had to read that in English class. And of course, I was the only Black student in the class. So everyone wanted to know what my opinion was. And I mean, I'd hoped that my opinion about the book was the same as everyone's opinion. But my teacher was passing out the books and announced to the class that because, you know, this book uses the N-word, that she was going to say it because it was just a word and it meant absolutely nothing. And, you know, that we didn't have to say it, but at the end of the day, it means nothing and it shouldn't matter.
That it doesn't mean anything.
So I was in the 10th grade, and I'm not the kind of person who likes conflict. So of course I just kind of sat there and like nodded my head like okay. But it was very uncomfortable. And yeah, like so it was my whole public school career, I guess, that I dealt with that.
Wow, that it doesn't mean anything. You know, like, well, 300 years of slavery, nothing. The word means nothing. Civil rights, you know, people getting killed, raped, you know, the N word doesn't mean anything. That is Oh my god, I hope that doesn't happen with my kids because I would have a tantrum at that school. I would cause mayhem. Uh, would you say that your experiences or bad experiences were mostly in school or like led up to school?
They were always in school. I of course like I played sports and stuff like outside of school, but there were never any issues like outside of school. It was always between the four walls of whatever, level of education I was at.
So would it be correct to say that most of your racism experience happened at school?
Yes.
Oh wow. So how does somebody, and again I'm not, I guess I'll got towards you, but you don't have to answer it because I don't think nobody would have the answer for that. How did you learn to live with those experiences going over? Because again, I think school is half of our lives, technically. So did you became numb to it, or how did you deal with it?
I mean, I wouldn't say that I became numb to it per se, but I definitely had the mindset that nothing surprised me anymore. It wasn't like clockwork where every couple of days I was dealing with some sort of issue, but it was definitely enough that it was like persistent. But yeah, like I sort of gave up in a way, like I had gone through the motions of being silent and just like nodding along and kind of saying like, okay, like that's not nice to say or whatever. And then I switched to a platform of being more vocal and educating people and stuff like that. And then I got to the point where I realized that no one else was backing me up, so it was easier to just get up and leave class than have to deal with it.
And what about the teachers and the principal and the school board? Did any of them interfered in any sort of way?
Um, no. So especially, I had the most issues in high school, because of course at those ages people are aware of what they're saying, and they know what it means and they have the intention, but on multiple different occasions, it was just I was told that it was my word against their word, and there was no proof of what was said, so they really can't do anything about it.
And how did your mom take that?
She was very upset. I mean, naturally, any parent would be. But at the same time, she also kind of followed in my footsteps and followed what I wanted to do, because there were certain instances where she wanted to email the principal and do this and that. And I was like, no, like, I don't want that to happen, because I know that there's going to be some sort of domino effect. And she listened. And then there were other times where I said, this is not okay. I want you to do something about it, and then she would take the appropriate measures.
Oh wow. So I mean, we had previous guests here. I think that and the common denominator is racism at school. I don't think I think maybe one or two out of all these guests that we had over the years have said that school was cool, like it was great, it was amazing. But most of the people of color, older and younger, have said that they experience racism in school, especially in New Brunswick, especially in Atlantic Canada. Like in Atlantic Canada is it's known for that, which is a sad thing to say. But there comes a point that this goes way past education, right? This goes to your life. This affects your life. And Hillary can she has written multiple blogs about this, multiple texts about how this kind of led to things like addiction or things like you know like getting some type of physical or verbal abuse and things like that. Would you say that that has happened to you, that that has caused trauma or mental illness in your life, or some type of things that you have to deal with because of that?
I would say that it's definitely played a factor in mental health issues, because, I'm dealing with this every day at school, and then I'm coming home and having the internal conflict of not knowing who I am. Um, and that definitely caused a lot of anxiety and, sadness, because a lot of people are asking me questions that I didn't have the answers to. And then it just became frustrating. And it just, I always had this cloud hanging over my head with the question of who am I? And when you can't answer that yourself, then you just kind of feel like there's no hope in a way, if that makes sense.
Hillary, would you add to that? Because I think you would say that that kind of happened to you as well.
Oh, 100%. I think that it affected my self-esteem in a way that led to me trying to fill it in different ways. I definitely relate to just not knowing who I am and feeling, and I've said this before, but like just feeling like there was no sense of community around me for me even to explore, and not knowing where to start. And yeah, a definite sadness, and just trying to like grapple at anything that made me feel like, is this the person that I am? Is this happiness? Is this fulfilling? Is this interesting to me? And then you sort of become like, I know that this also comes from other various traumas, but you end up becoming a mosaic of other people that you want to be like, but they're not you, and they don't fully represent you, and they don't fully represent who you want to be. And so now I'm just like in therapy, like, what elements of the people that I wanted to be like are truly genuine to my personhood? And so I'm 27 trying to figure out who I am when I could have figured it out at 14 if I would have had a sense of self or desire to be Black, or anyone in my corner saying it's okay to have braids or be a color or be someone different.
This is crazy because I'm sitting here listening to everyone and I'm being filled with like a huge sadness myself. And I was actually, before you said that, feeling like I'm going through some kind of therapy right now, because I always say, like I said earlier, around all these cultures, and that was my sense of community. But me and my siblings spent our whole lives asking those same questions too. And we've talked about it. Like, we didn't know who we were. We didn't know where we belonged. We didn't, and it probably did cause a lot of different self-esteem issues in each of us. So even though we're not even done the episode, I just love talking to other people. When I was young, there wasn't a lot of mixed kids around. When my parents got married, and they got married in like the 60s. This is like before the civil rights movements in the States. So there weren't a lot of mixed kids growing around. There was every culture, but there weren't kids like me. And go on. But yeah, I'm really feeling everything here too, everything you're saying, Savannah.
I mean, go ahead, Hillary. Sorry. Oh, okay. I thought you were gonna say something.
I was just moving a braid. I was just moving
well.
a flyaway hair. Go on.
Now, a lot of people would say that, okay, teens go to depression, teens go to this phase. They would say that, but what would you tell somebody that would say that to you or Hillary? Like, what would you say that would say, oh, all teens go to this kind of phase of depression and mental illness? Like, what would you say?
I would say, that's obviously perfectly natural that, we're going through these big changes in our lives. But I feel as though depression that other teens may have would not be directly related to their race, if that makes sense. There's plenty of other external factors that a white teen may encounter that could be the source of their depression. But I feel as though being white and questioning, how do I word this? Being white is not.
You can curse here and say whatever you
It's
want.
layers.
Yeah.
It's layers, right? It's
Yeah,
all
like being
face plus everything
like
you're discussing today.
Being white is not the source of their depression. They might be gay and not know it, or they might have family troubles, or they might have school troubles, or anything like that might be the root cause. But at the end of the day, I don't think that a white person or a white teen can question who am I and have it be related to race.
Yeah, Hillary, would you agree on that, or would you?
Yeah, what I was gonna say is that it's the same conversation around privilege, right? And how white people are like, how can you say I have white privilege if I'm poor? And it's not to say that there aren't white people or other ethnicities that have it hard. It's just to say that this is specifically a sadness, a detriment, a questioning of self because of being mixed race or an identity that doesn't go with the flow or isn't the majority of the kids in New Brunswick. And you asking that question reminded me that like there's teen depression, but there was a black 8-year-old kid in 2019 who committed suicide because of being bullied. That's not teen depression. That's overt racism making a kid kill himself at an age of 8 when he should be like concerned about Paw Patrol, not about his identity. So it's not teen depression. It's not I don't know what to do and my hormones are fluctuating. It's like kids being targeted across multiple countries because of their identity. And like, I shouldn't have been called a nigger baby at 2. I shouldn't have had kids like say things about me in the 3rd grade. That's not teenage years. That's not a normal questioning of self that comes from puberty and exploring your body parts and your imagination and like television and like sexuality and those things. It's an innate thing of, I like Savannah said, seeing your skin and thinking that you're dirty when you're 5 is not a normal part of growing up. That's not something that any kid should have to go through.
I mean, I definitely agree well, in every sense, shape, or form. I think one of the factors here in Atlantic Canada is that I think race in schools, and we're gonna talk about that in a little bit later on. I think it's not taught. I think it doesn't. There's not saying like, hey, look what racism has caused over these centuries, and this is why it's not okay, and this is what the repercussions, and this is what, especially in a place like we're so close to Nova Scotia that has like a history of that. Like it has a 100-year history. Even let's not even go that far. Fredericton or St. John, hundreds of years of histories of Black people being repressed, being in economic positions, and this is not taught in school, and that's why kids don't really say too much about it. They don't understand it, and frankly, they don't care. But when you were in school, and that's something that I see a lot here, did you ever realize that there was nothing about racism that was taught, or there was nothing about racism that was said, or even something that is even deep enough? Did you ever realize that, or did you just went and said this is ridiculous, or like I said, you left?
I think that in a way I kind of realized, of course I did get up and leave from time to time because I didn't want to deal with that. But there were a lot of times where I just sat back and realized and thought that there's a lot of education that's lacking. Just simple things like, if you're a white person, calling a Black person the N word is not a good idea. We don't do that. And just very simple things that I thought were self-explanatory that I know because I had to grow up with that and deal with that, that those were things that my white counterparts weren't aware of. And maybe they weren't aware of it, or maybe they just didn't care. I don't really know, but that was definitely something that I realized.
Now, growing up in another country, I can tell you that, and I'm older, I'm 38 years old. Growing up in another country where there's different languages and different rhythms and different things, you pretty much stay within the realms of that culture. However, I can tell you for a fact that hip hop culture has gone global. Anywhere you would go, people would want to dress like rappers. Everywhere you go, people want to be, or that transcended that culture from the United States, transcended to other places. here it has done the same thing, but it doesn't seem to connect to white kids that, hey, this is a culture made by people of color, and there should be some type of respect, and I know you enjoy it, but there seems to be some type of, like, sometimes they make a joke out of it, and that's when the racism comes, when it becomes, and that's when I say, like, when that becomes a joke or racism or something offensive, that is something that, it should be like, whoa, wait a minute, this is where you draw the line. And if you, I think I remember Hillary's blog that people were saying, like, in her yearbook, oh, what's up, my nigger, and stuff like that, and things like that. And it definitely comes from a black hip hop culture, but it's like a quite on unawareness of it. Did you face that as well? Like, you saw these people trying to be kind of black and then kind of disrespecting people for that were black?
Can't wait
So
to hear your answer by that look on your face.
so I remember a couple different occasions. When I was in the 10th grade, I was dating this boy, and he was white. And even though I'm black, like, I'm not like the keeper of all knowledge and all things that are black. So there was a lot of things that I didn't know.
Nobody
And
is.
yeah, and like, he used to come to school every day with these hoodies that said NWA on the back. Well, I had no idea what NWA was. Like, that's not the kind of music that I listen to. So I come home and I ask my mom, and I'm like, what does NWA mean? And she's like, well, where did you hear that? And I said, well, like, this boy that I'm dating, like, he wears all these hoodies and like he raps all these words, and like, I don't know what that means. And then she tells me, and I'm like, oh, well, this is not good. Like, I'm not, no, no, no. So I found it very interesting because he dressed the part in a way. He dressed very I don't know, like, black, if that makes sense. And obviously I broke up with him after like 4 days because I was like, I don't know what's happening here. But it eventually came out that, like, he he thought that he could like appropriate that culture, and he only wanted to date ethnic girls. And I remember I was like, I don't know what what is happening. So I found that was really interesting. And then I remember when I was in grade 12, there was this boy who was in a number of my classes, unfortunately. And he was white, and he used to come every day, and he had like this bandana thing around his forehead, and he used to like wear his pants low and like all these things. And I just think this is complete nonsense, of course. And he used to like rap all these words and like say all these things, and like listening to these rappers that I'm like, I have no idea who you're talking about. And he used to come in every day and he'd say, hey, what's up, my N-word? I'm like, you don't just get to say that. And he's like, well, I listen to rap music and I have black friends, and that means that I'm black. And I'm like, that does not mean that you're black. Like, you can appreciate the music, and you can listen to these things, and you can admire the culture, but it doesn't change the fact that at the end of the day, you're white, and you can't just come in here and say that, because you do these things, that makes you black. Because does that mean that if I do certain things, that makes me white? Like, yeah.
So I just have a question for context. How many years ago was this?
So I graduated in 2018.
Okay. And is this at Fredericton High?
Yes.
Okay. It just really makes sense that they just all think that they are thugs. And so them taking a class photo as thugs sort of goes in line with the story that you're telling.
Well, and so after high school, of course, like, I didn't talk to this boy. I mean, obviously not. And it was actually a few months ago that he reached out to me on Instagram. And I was very confused because, like, why are you trying to talk to me? And after him, like, going on about, I don't even know what, he told me that he is black and that he is a strong Black man and that he needs a strong Black queen by his side and he wants to choose me.
I'm confused. Is he white?
Yes, he is white.
Like, did he do a 23andMe and found out something, or he's just really doubling down on what he said 3 years prior?
Yes, he thinks that because he has Black
Cool.
friends and he listens to rap music and does these things, that makes him Black.
Has anyone tested the water in Fredericton for some kind of illness? This is too many people who think that they're Black.
I mean, I would not just say Fredericton. I seen this in places like, you know, Moncton. We had the girl from Negawak. What's her name?
Lindaway.
Lindaway. She did kind of suspected something like that as well. In places like the Miramichi, I seen again. I don't think it's a Fredericton issue. And I think
It'd be mostly a Fredericton issue.
No.
That's the epicenter.
It just sounds to me like they have the hub of white men who think that they're Black, and there are outliers. Because when I went to high school, of course, they were all doing the same thing, listening to rap, saying, "Hey, my nigga, what's good?" And I would not do the thing of like, you can't say that. I had given up on that. But none of them were trying to convince me that they were Black. They were convinced that because they were saying it to me, a Black person, it was allowed. But they wouldn't really like say it elsewhere. They're like, no, like we're friends and you've given me the N-word pass. I can say it, right? But they weren't there being like, no, yo, I'm a Black man. I'm gonna need you to be my queen. Let's go out. No one wanted to date me, not even for my Blackness. So
why do I feel like I'm watching a fictional comedy right now? Like
this is just life in this is just being Black in the Maritime.
But I mean, Clinton, even for you and me, we've been to the club scene, and the amount of white people that were trying to say it and had to check them on that for saying the N-word, it was more than one. It was like I usually check them real quick, but it has happened. I mean, the people that think
absolutely.
So I don't think it's a fact. And these are adults. These were grown as ID carrying adults. When it comes to kids, that some kids may know better or don't know any better, like kids, you're still trying to find out. I think personally, I didn't find out who I was till my late 20s. I think I had to find out like in my late 20s. I kind of grasped it, but I think most people don't know who they are at that point in life, and they did what Savannah's Instagram buddy or high school person did, which is it's crazy. To us, it's crazy. To the common world, it is crazy, but it is something that, and I think that's part of the white privilege, right? Like only the white man is able to say that. Like only the white man is able to have that authority to say that. And I think, and I was gonna go back to the hip hop part. I think I spoke to a music executive one, and he was like the only Black music executive in the whole record label, and he told me something like, when hip hop came in the late 80s, I'm sorry, in the late 70s, early 80s, it was cataloged as thug music, gangster music, Black music, ghetto music, everything. When it started generating dollars for the white corporation, it cataloged as urban because they had to call it something. And he told me, like, yeah, they had to call it something. They couldn't call it Black music because now they were profiting out of it and people were going to be upset. So they got this name urban. And that's what they put a label on it, and they put urban department or urban music or urban clothing. And when what you really were trying to say is, hey, this is Black clothing. You pretty much appropriated a whole culture, but now you're profiting out of it. And that's, you know, I don't think, going to back to Hillary, you said, I don't think it's just Fredericton. I don't think it's just the Maritimes. I think it's Winnipeg. I think it's BC. I think it's Ontario. In some places, it happens less than other places. I could definitely, but I think it happens everywhere in Canada. And I think that's one of the things that Canada tries to not talk about. I think we try to not talk about it because it's like, oh, but if you look at our website or our social media pages and places that we try not to create our own news because we're not journalists. We usually take it out of the CBC, CTV, the Rude, or places that in the United States, or Blabity, or places like that, right? And the amount of kids that are bullied and the amount of kids that are facing racism in 2021, it's still ridiculous. It is still in freaking sane. Uh, and Savannah, you just got out in 2018. Like you were in the age of social media. So that's kind of crazy. Clinton, go ahead.
That's just actually what I was most surprised about when I commented a few minutes ago about this like fictional comedy. Like I know you're very young, Savannah, but as I was listening to your story, I was kind of like imagining, and I was thinking like this is a story from like the 90s or something that where it happened, like bandanas and NWA sweaters and like in the school grounds rapping and using the N-word. I just didn't, I always joke that New Brunswick is like a couple decades behind the rest of the world, but that was what really caught me off guard. Yeah.
That is, again, I think that's Canada, and you know, one of the reasons that we found you, especially Hillary, that got in contact with you, is because there was this piece about the school you went with, which was Fredericton High, about a shot of the class of 2020, I think it was, or 2020, and they were all dressed like quote unquote gangsters, but they were all white. And again, I'm pretty sure, you know, you could have done the mafia, people would have gotten it. And I think there wouldn't be like a big thing. But basically, you're appropriating Black fashion culture and you're appropriating as criminality, which not only you're making a joke out of it, which is just the first thing you're making a joke, but you're also expropriating a joke out of a race that has been cataloged at things that has not. Because again, I think one of the things that bothered me about that is like, imagine we have seen Trevor Martin, well, as early as Emmett Till when we weren't, no one of us weren't born, and we got, you know, George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, you know, the SEAL. We have hundreds of them. We can talk all day about how many Black people have been killed for just minding their own business. And I think one of the things that they don't understand is that there are people that wear that type of clothing and they have PhDs and they have jobs and normal lives, but they would get killed easily by the cops because they were wearing that, which is the and I think that's the part. But you were the person that you said, I am not surprised. You were like, I'm not surprised this happened. This was cool. Now, when you saw that and you were not surprised, did it validate everything you have thought this whole time?
Yeah, I mean, that was my mom had originally shown me like the first picture. And that was my first comment of this doesn't surprise me. And you know, I knew I knew that something like this was bound to happen. I just didn't know when. And unfortunately, whether people want to believe it or not, that's what Fredericton High is like, and those are the kinds of students that go there.
And again, you just got out 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago. Not necessarily because the school season just started. Everything's on social media. You were on social media when all of this happened. Was this ever a conversation that happened in social media where while you were at school?
Um, do you mean like the like race issue or?
Race issue, or the fact that people are getting bullied because of their race, or the fact that there's no racism thought, or the fact that nobody really like that there's some, I would say oppression, I would definitely say oppression to a handful of students because of the color of their skin.
So it was definitely not talked about. I mean, I had said earlier that all of the things that I learned I had to do through self-education. And I can't really think of a time where it was discussed. I mean, if you count Reading to Kill a Mockingbird, there was a brief moment of civil rights and talking about that. But other than that, any type of discussion that happened in school was usually brought on by me or if I didn't bring it up, teachers were talking about it, and then they would ask what my opinion was. So then, of course, I had to fall into the educator role and teach everyone else about, race and racism and stuff like that.
Go ahead, Hillary.
I'm just curious because of like the amount of bullying that happens on social media, and you've talked about like the experiences that happened in school, and I'm just curious because like clearly this whole wearing the thug outfit or whatever was organized through like texting or social media or something. Did you experience or notice a lot of like overt racism on social media, like from your own classmates? Because that's like Facebook, I think, came out when I was like in 10th grade. So I wasn't seeing like kids weren't commenting on my kids being like, yo, my nigga, what's good? I have it in permanent writing in a yearbook. But so I'm just curious if you were experiencing anything like that too, that would sort of like also validate like this whack behavior.
To be honest, no, I did not have a lot of friends in high school. I actually had no friends in high school.
Me neither.
So,
it's okay.
Yeah. So, like I didn't have people commenting things like that on my social medias. I wasn't really included in any type of grad events, and FHS, they do like the dress up days, obviously. But I was never included in that. I never received any type of text or message saying, hey, we're doing this today, like come out and wear this and stuff like that. So I mean, even if it was going on, I wasn't included in it, so I wouldn't have even known.
I will ask you something, and this goes to the higher ups of school, especially the one you went to, which is Fredericton High. Uh, would you say that the staff, either some of them are racist or racial tendencies, or they just don't? Well, I personally think that people don't give a fuck, but I think they do. But that's just my personal opinion. Do you think in the higher up there is some type of racism or bias to people of color when it comes to like the principals, the teachers, the school board, and things like that?
Um, I think so. I mean, for me, when I was a student there, it was kind of apparent that we weren't, people of color and Black people in particular weren't necessarily um, made to feel like we should be there. When I was going to FHS, all of the staff were white. We had no people of color that were teachers, EAs, principals, anything like that. Even down to the bus drivers. Like I had never been in close contact within the school system with someone who looked like me. And I think that definitely plays a role, and whether or not the teachers and the principals don't feel that it's necessary to talk about these things because the majority of the population is white, or if it's just that they don't care, I'm not exactly sure. But what I do know is that, when you are an educator, saying that you don't know isn't an option. Like it shouldn't be an excuse. And if you choose to be an educator, that means that you are choosing to take on the role of educating students about all aspects of the world. And that includes more than just about white culture and white people.
That's pretty good. I think I agree in the sense. And again, I can't say myself because I didn't go to school here. Hillary can actually vouch more because she went to school here, and she has been very open about her institutions. Now, you're now in university. You are now working with other Black people in Fredericton, like Tandaway, and like all the art collective. What would you say for you personally, now that you are working with other people of color that might relate to you? What's the feeling like now versus what when you were at school?
It definitely feels less lonely. I feel like I have a community of people that I can talk to, that, understand me. And it's just nice to be able to go to people and say, hey, this is what happened, and for them to be able to relate and give suggestions or sit and talk to me about it and how I'm feeling and stuff like that. And I didn't have that opportunity when I was in the education system, well, the public education system. I never had a mentor or friends or anything like that who looked like me, who had experienced those things where they could then advise me on what I should do. And I think that's definitely the biggest difference.
Now, I'm going to throw a plug. We're doing a special episode on CBC all week about racism and school bullying in New Brunswick. And we have talked to several people about this. And I'll ask you the same question I asked to Kalkidan Burke, which is one of the persons that I interviewed that she's going to be part and showcase. What do you think is needed in our schools for this to be less of an issue as somebody that has experienced it?
I think the starting point is, to educate the teachers who are currently teaching, but then to also get more teachers and educated professionals who are of color, who can, speak more to those issues, but then also to question why we don't have a lot of teachers who are of color, and why they're not applying for jobs, at least in Fredericton. This is what I'm speaking to. But asking ourselves, why is Fredericton a majority white education system, and how can we fix that? Because I think that it's once we start asking ourselves those questions that then we'll kind of have a domino effect, which will then create more change.
Hillary, could you add something to that? Because I think you probably would have something to add as well.
Yeah, I mean, I asked my former high school teacher who I interviewed, and it's what she highlighted is that there are teachers who maybe don't want to change the way that they teach, and so it becomes an issue with the pedagogy of, I don't really want to include Black history in these courses, and so unless you literally tell me to, I'm going to let it fall to other teachers who maybe have more comfortability with it. And so it becomes about our government, who we know presently just loves Black people, to put policies in place.
And they love Indigenous too.
Yes, they do. To put policies in place where people who don't want to support Black people don't have another option but to support these narratives and help these people. And I definitely agree that asking those tough questions about, like, where are Black teachers or people teaching Black history who can also be representative of that culture and of these different diversities. When I graduated high school almost 10 years ago, there weren't Black teachers then either. There apparently still aren't, at least in Fredericton. I don't know that there are any at Harrison Tribble High School where I went now. And like the person I interviewed did say that the situation is better and there's a lot more diversity in terms of students, but there's still a long way to go. And the other issue that was highlighted to me, not to spoil the whole interview, but the way that things are evolving so quickly with social media and with social injustice issues, is that the works that they're giving teachers to educate themselves with are not being updated fast enough with the way the world is moving. And so it's about dismantling that system as well. If you're relying on the district to get the teachers up to pace with what Black people are experiencing in real life, they're books and years behind, the George Floyd incident and what's going on now. And so a lot needs to be updated and fixed.
I'll ask this question to everybody, including myself, because I know Clinton, Hillary, you guys are working on a project, which I think it's a great initiative, and I think it's something, hopefully it goes forward. But is it a job of the system to get this kind of under control, or do you think it's something that people have to push to get that up to the system? or people have to just take it on their own hands to get it under control?
Savannah, you can go first.
Unfortunately, I will say that it's something that we're probably going to have to push for. Anything that we've ever gotten or fought for, we've had to do the work ourselves. I would like to say that the internal system should be able to acknowledge that it's a problem, and they should be able to take the appropriate actions in order to fix the problem. But I do think that we as a society will have to fight for it in order to get the system to recognize that it's a problem and something needs to be done.
Clinton?
I would say we could discuss all day whose job it is, but what we know is that the system hasn't done it, and so that the people do have to push for it and fight for it to make the system do it, because only the system can do it. So we have to become the system and do it.
Hillary?
I agree with both of you. I think that obviously, like, Black people, marginalized people, diverse people have to fight for their seats at the table, unfortunately. But there also needs to be like room at the table made. Like, we can continue to argue for Black history to be added into curriculums, for teachers to have diversity training, for those things to be up to date. But if there aren't infrastructure, systems, funds to back up the cause, we're not going to really get anywhere until people in leadership want to change the policies, want to listen to us and the other people who are contributing to this continuum and the other, movements that are trying to happen. So I think that we have to start it and we have to fight for what we want, but there has to be people backing the movement, because unfortunately we do not have enough power to usurp Blaine Higgs and get what we need and what we want.
Exactly.
Yeah.
As for myself, I will definitely say that I am kind of like one of the people that I don't wait to get a seat at the table. I just sit myself and then say like, "Hey, here I am. What you like? I'll push the table. I'll push the door if I need to get in the goddamn seat." Uh, that's my way of thinking. Now, is it wrong or is it right? I definitely don't know. I would definitely say I don't have the answer for that. However, when it comes to things like this, somebody has to do something. I mean, we cannot just stand there and watch it just happen. And over the years, it's so easy for people like us to say, am I the problem? Because that's where you first go to. You first like, am I not good enough? Am I not insecure enough? Am I not this person? Am I not this and this and that? Because you first, and then when you realize that, oh, it just doesn't happen to you, and it just happens to the people that just happen to have the same shade of the skin that you have, nothing in common. Sometimes you don't even speak the same language, and it just happens the same thing that happens to you happens to them, just because of the shade of it. So I don't necessarily know what the best way to go. I think we have to change the system because that's how it goes. I think that's something given, not just for racism. I think the whole structure of the way we live in is because of changes on the system. However, I also think that as a parent, I cannot just let the system go to my children as I know, but that's because I know it, right? Like, I'm pretty sure Hillary's mom didn't know the system because she was a single mom. Your mom probably had other things and didn't know the system. I actually had to I had to take the time to do this, and it's taken me a while. But as a parent, I see like, wait a minute, I cannot let this happen to my kids. So I have to do something about it. So I personally, I think it has to be maybe a hybrid of things. I think maybe people have to change to push for change, but I think people have to make change. And again, I don't even know if that's the right answer to it, just because it's very complex. Now, Savannah, what do you hope for for yourself now that you are in university, and what's the experience been in university, and what do you hope for the future as a person?
My experiences has been pretty good so far. I'm hoping that I'll be able to connect with the Black community um, in university, and I can, make more friends and connect with more people who are like me. And I just hope that I'll be able to continue my path of advocacy work and work on my writing and really create some waves and make some change.
All right. So if people want to reach you, where do they go to?
So I have a Facebook page that has some of my writing on it. It's called Savannah's Voice. But other than that, I'm on Instagram and I'm also on Facebook. And yeah, I'm everywhere.
All right. So Savannah, we really want to thank you for being on this. I think it's pretty interesting, and I I learned a lot. I definitely think that I wanted to take this interview, and maybe the guys want to take it to certain places, but I see that there's a lot of experience from your things in high school. Some that could be even very traumatic, and I feel like those I don't want to even ask them because I don't think they're proper to go to to people to get to. But I think that you came out of it, and I hope more people come out of it. And again, I will encourage you to people of color, please try to get mental help. Try to get help. I definitely think that that is important, especially for younger people that are going to maybe something. And hit us up at blackinthemaritimes@gmail.com. Just tell us your experience. And we definitely want to hear more from other people that might experience what you guys went to. So, all right. So, you guys have anything else to say?
I'm good. Just thank you so much for coming on, especially short notice. I'm really excited that we got to line this up with the CBC interviews that will be airing this week. I think that this will all be released in conjunction, hopefully. But thank you, and I'm sorry you went through what I went through, except so many years later, and that the province has never progressed.
Well, thank you guys for having me.
Oh, always, for sure. And again, guys, just subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. Don't forget to rate and leave a comment. Also, please donate on Patreon, PayPal. Check out our website, Black in the Maritimes, and go to our social media pages on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok at Black in the Maritimes. So thank you for listening.
Peace.
Bye.